Well, hi everyone, and greetings from Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy. One of the many things that I enjoy in life is a good story. Recently, my wife and I got 23andMe and checked our genetics to find out where our families came from and what our history was. It was kind of interesting when I reviewed mine. I'm in excess of 79% English, Scottish, and Irish, and most of the remainder is Northern European. However, looking down on that list a little bit, I found an interesting item. I am 1.1% Corsican. Now, there's a story behind that, I think, back in the 17th century. Someday I'd like to find out what it was. What would you say if what you believed about your history was not really true? Is there an alternate history? Well, some people seem to think it is, and it's a pretty good story. So I thought that I'd share my explorations of it with you a little bit and look into the history of Tartaria and the mud flood. Now, the idea behind Tartaria was that there was this ancient, advanced Atlantean-style civilization that used to control much of the world, and all traces of this civilization were removed just a couple of hundred years ago. Let's let Max Egan, who does a lot of YouTube videos on this subject, start the story for us.
Recently, you have probably heard me talking quite a bit about history, quite a bit about the lost nation of Tartaria, a nation that existed in Europe that nobody seems to know about. It's a nation that's been expunged from history, and yet it still exists on many maps. Well, it still exists on many old maps anyway. It doesn't exist on too many new maps, but you can still find it on old maps if you search for it, and it does appear to be quite a well-known and well-established nation. Of course, any academic sources that you question about this nation, they will simply tell you it was an area of land, it was never actually a nation, and yet, as I've also pointed out previously, we can find flags of this nation. And if it was just an area and not a nation, then it wouldn't have a flag. So it was, in fact, a nation and not simply an area of land, and there's every indication that it had also spread out to become a worldwide civilization.
Now, Tartaria was the area of northern and central Asia. If you want to think who were the Tartans, you think of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire. Now, the difference between historical Tartaria and what they talk about with the Tartarian mud flood is that they seem to believe that Tartaria extended to a much greater extent throughout the world, almost a worldwide empire, certainly to include North America. And the other thing about it is that they were an advanced civilization. Think of a cross between Genghis Khan and the Mongols in Atlantis.
This is very much suggested by the similar architecture in so many countries around the world, very old architecture, which is all very much the same. And this is what is termed Greco-Roman architecture. But one would ask, why would every country around the world be building their government buildings using the same architecture? You find this everywhere. You find it all through the Americas. You find it through South America. You find it even in Japan and Australia. So why would they be using the same style? That's the question.
Now, this is a very good question and one that I'm thinking about a little bit. Why would you use solid, fortress-like, imposing buildings for your public architecture? Maybe to send a message about your government that it's solid. But more importantly, why would a people based in Northern and Central Asia choose the architecture of Italy and Greece to represent their culture? Did they not have their own architecture in Northern and Central Asia? The answer to this is actually fascinating, and we're going to be exploring the relationship between the two regions in later episodes.
And even not just the architecture, but the symbolism, the motifs, the designs, even the clothing, the styles of clothing that people wear, these are all very similar all around the world. They may not seem that way when you first look at them on the surface, but when you really analyze things, you find that they all have a common root, which very much suggests that all of these nations, all of these cultures were all connected. And no matter how you look at it, this is very much what is indicated, ladies and gentlemen.
Now, while clothing can be determined by environment and religious preferences, culture is also something that dictates what we wear for clothing. So this is an interesting assertion. We'll explore it a little further.
And also through the discovery of a worldwide language, which was Magyar, or the root language of Hungarian.
Now, as badly as I butcher the English language with my pronunciation and accent, I'm certainly not a linguist. However, I can research it. These are the Uralic languages. Now, the languages that he is discussing are FW1 and FW2 down there in Hungary, but they're related to all of these languages in northern Russia. Now, that will become important later, this connection between northern Russia and specifically the Soviet Union and Tartaria,
which was spoken by the Incas, by the Polynesians, and also by all the Australian Aboriginals, and many cultures all around the world seem to have spoken this language.
Well, Quechua seems to be the official language of the Inca Empire, and it seems to come from the western coast of South America. I haven't been able to find any link between Hungarian or any of the Uralic languages. Now, as far as the Australian Aborigines, they seem to have over 250 different languages, but they also seem to be isolated to the Australian continent. There's not a lot of connection to the other islands in the Southwest Pacific.
Polynesians, Melanesians, all of the island cultures seem to have spoken it. In fact, Magyar seems to have been so common around the world that one might question if one were to apply Magyar translations to some of the lost languages that we still can't figure out, such as the Rondo and things like this. Perhaps we could find that there is a way of translating them if we use Magyar. Who knows? It's just a thought.
I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Perhaps one of the viewers has some interest in linguistics and can help me out with this a little bit. Drop a note in the comment. I'd be happy to do a collab with you if you'd like to explore this a little bit more.
And something else you've heard me talking about a great deal is the evidence suggesting a worldwide mud flood that happened as recently as 150 to 200 years ago.
Yes, folks, you heard that right. Part of this Tartarian mud flood theory is that this advanced Atlantean civilization of Greater Tartary was destroyed in a worldwide flood of mud less than 2 centuries ago. Let's let him explain it a little bit.
As I've mentioned before, there's a Russian channel run by a man called Philip Druzinin who is covering this quite extensively, and I do recommend you go and look at the research that he's done on this because it is quite compelling. And you'll find that there is evidence of this mud flood that exists everywhere. I mean, it did happen, folks, and it was a physical flood, but it was not water, and it was an event that covered virtually the entire world. We can find evidence of this flood across Europe, across the Americas, even here in Australia.
Yep, that's what they say. Now, he's going to lay out why they feel there is evidence visible to us now of this great mud flood.
And evidence of this flood appears as buildings that have a sub-level, a level below ground, and also as many of the buildings that look like they were carved into rock faces, look like they were carved into cliffs. There's a very real possibility that they weren't carved into the cliffs, but simply the cliffs flowed over them, or perhaps the cliffs even became molten around them. But however it happened and however it manifested, suffice to say there is a good deal of evidence to indicate that the mud flood is a very, very genuine event, and it's very likely that it occurred in the mid to late 1840s.
Now, just to put this into a little historical context, this is about 10 years before the charge of the Light Brigade in the Crimean War. Every man in this painting right here, Russian and English, would have lived through it.
And there's a lot of people who've been putting a lot of research into this, and a lot of information is being uncovered about what has truly happened in the past. And our history appears to be very, very different to what the mainstream has taught us, to what we've learned in academic institutions, what we learned in schools. In fact, none of what we are taught in schools of what our history is backed up by physical evidence. All the physical evidence says something quite different.
Indeed, and that something quite different was this Atlantean civilization, which extended, as you can see, all the way to North America. That Rome, Egypt, and ancient Greece all occurred in the Middle Ages. That Jesus lived in the 12th century AD. And that all of civilization ended around 1840.
And there may be some people that would debate that. They'd say, well, no, we've got a lot of physical evidence to support the official timeline. But really, when you look at the physical evidence, you can construct any story you want to make it sort of fit with the evidence, but you have to leave a great deal of it out, which is why there's so many great mysteries and anomalous objects and all the names they think up for all the things they can't explain. And ultimately, folks, if there's one artifact that is out of place, then the official version is wrong. And there are literally hundreds of artifacts that are out of place, if the official version is to be believed at all. And again, these are all sort of listed as anomalous objects and great mysteries and all shrouded in secrecy and presented as something that we just don't know how they did it. But really, if you can face the very real possibility that they don't fit because the timeline and the history that we're given is completely wrong, then you begin to see a little bit of the bigger picture.
Well, folks, that's the purpose of this series that I'm starting. Tuesday is going to be Tartaria Tuesday for the next few weeks, and we're going to have a look at this Tartarian mud flood issue. We're going to see what kind of evidence they have, what kind of conclusions they're making from that evidence, and then maybe look into some of the reasons that this may be coming about now. Well, guys, make sure you hit that little like and subscribe button down in the right corner, and I'm looking forward to continuing this journey with you. Take care, guys.